Okay, recording is going on now. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Moshe Kurtz, and I'm the assistant rabbi at Congregation Agudas Shalom. And I can see that we have a lot of representation with us so far this evening, so I don't even know if I need to make that introduction. But we have the privilege of having Rabbi Brander being our fourth rabbi who will be giving some pre-Hanukkah Torah. In fact, I think you are the final rabbi giving pre-Hanukkah Torah because our final one next week will actually be on Hanukkah itself. So Rabbi Brander is the Marada Asra. He's the rabbi of Young Israel, West Hartford. Has a special connection to us because I know Rabbi Cohen was in West Hartford for a little bit himself. And I also have a bit of a personal connection because when I was an intern at Young Israel Plainview for the past 2 years, I scrolled down the website and I saw that Rabbi Brander was my predecessor by many years. So there's many connections that we have in our little modern Orthodox Jewish world here in the Northeast. And this evening is really about creating stronger connections between our communities here in New England. Whether it's in West Hartford, whether it's in the Boston area, whether it's in Stamford, we're taking advantage of the fact that we're able to meet technologically. And God willing, we should all be able to see each other in person. Maybe post-corona, we'll have some sort of big convention one day, who knows? But Rabbi Brander has a very wonderful resume of different accomplishments, very much YU through and through with the Kollel Lahora, Rabbi Norman Lamb's Kollel, a master's degree in Bernard Revel Graduate School, Wexner Fellow, all the beautiful things that if you do what I did and you went on Young Israel West Hartford website, you can read it all. But if I keep going through that, I'll be taking up his shir time. So, Rabbi Brander, it is a huge chus to have you with us this evening, and we look forward to hearing your class on the liturgy of Maoz Tzur that we will soon be saying on Hanukkah night.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Kurtz. It's a pleasure to be with all of you tonight. And thank you so much for organizing this and taking the initiative to bring us all together. There are many challenges that this time has brought, but also a lot of blessings. It's a pleasure to be able to connect locally from long distance, but within the state via Zoom. While I appreciate your intro, I will acknowledge, it's a pleasure to acknowledge my mother-in-law who's on also, and I'm sure she was shepping even more nachas for that. So it's always great to share Torah in front of her. We have an exciting time tonight for us to share and study and look at this very exciting prayer of Maoz Tzur, the song of Maoz Tzur. I put the link again in the chat for the source sheet, so feel free to look at it, download it, print it out, look at it over Hanukkah. It's full of a lot of interesting source material, I hope. Let's start. And of course, any song, any conversation or shir about a song on Hanukkah has to start with a much more modern song, of course. If you join with me in source number one, of course, the Adam Sandler Hanukkah song. Now, if you're not familiar of the etymology of this holy Hanukkah song, I'm about to share it with you because I think it sets up an interesting foil for our conversation tonight. Please feel free if you have any questions to chime in, of course, or add them to the chat, and look forward to engaging with everyone. So Adam Sandler comes up on Saturday Night Live, and he describes that as a child, this time of year always made him feel a little left out. Because in school, there's so many Xmas songs, and all us Jewish kids, all we had to sing was dreidel, dreidel, dreidel. So he wrote his own Hanukkah song. And for those who are familiar with it, it goes through a list of people who either are Jewish or aren't Jewish, or he hopes will be Jewish or hopes aren't Jewish. Either way, but his contention is that there aren't really many Hanukkah songs out there. And if you think for a moment, do you think he's right? Can they unmute themselves?
Yes.
Right. Feel free to chime in. Is he right? Do we have some Hanukkah songs besides for dreidel, dreidel? And any suggestions come to mind? I'll give you a hint. One of them's in the title of this class.
Hanukkah, Hanukkah.
Oh, Hanukkah. That's a good one.
So.
Sivivon. Oh, great. Going to the Hebrew one. I'm waiting for someone to suggest a Yiddish one. Right? We have Maoz Tzur. We have Hanerot Halalu, which is a very old one. But as we'll see, in part of our conversation tonight is going to be in three different parts. One of the core facets of Hanukkah is actually music. In some ways, even more than anything else that we think about, the most important thing about Hanukkah, more important than the sufganiyot, more important than the jelly donuts, more important than the latkes, and even more important than the candles. That'll be the first part. Then we're going to explore a little bit of the meaning of Maoz Tzur, and then try to unpack what the mystery of Maoz Tzur has for us, for our understanding. What message is it trying to convey and reinforce for us? So Maoz Tzur, in its earliest form, we at least are familiar with it in the 15th century. We read of in a book by Rabbi Yosef ben Moshe about his teacher, Rabbi the Trumas Hadeshen, who was one of the foremost halachic and custom interpreters of Ashkenazic community that kind of led as a forerunner to the code of Jewish law that we have. And we have a note that on Friday night, he used to sing songs. And if you skip with me in source number 2 and related other songs, he would sing Maoz Tzur Yeshuati on Hanukkah. So we have at least already attested that Maoz Tzur at least goes all the way back to the 15th century. There's actually a brilliant idea here, which, it just bears repeating. I don't know how early Shabbos was in the winter in Germany, but at least in Connecticut, right, this Shabbos, Hanukkah, we're rushing before Shabbos to light the candles and welcome Shabbos. So he just pushed off Maoz Tzur to his Shabbos meal. So don't sing it when you're rushed before shul on Shabbos morning, on Friday afternoon. Sing it Friday night at the Shabbos table over some nice bowl of soup or something like that. So we already see that this story is that we have this song already in the 15th century. And actually the tune comes from an amalgamation of two well-known German folk songs that were very popular at the time. There's a wonderful speech. It's about 7 minutes that talks about the tone of Maoz Tzur by Cantor Bernard Beer of the Bells School of Music at Yeshiva University. And he goes through the etymology. I gave you the source right over here. And he points out that next to Atikva, Maoz Tzur is probably one of the best known melodies among Jews in the entire world. And whether we take that or not, it is fascinating that Maoz Tzur spreads like fire across the Jewish world. First in the German community, and then across the Ashkenazi community, and then making its way to our brothers and sisters in Spanish and Sephardic communities, and really across the whole world. Maoz Tzur is universally sung in a remarkable way, which is very rare in our liturgy. So we're spending a lot of time talking about Maoz Tzur, but let's talk a little about music in general. And if you jump with me to section number 3, and you think about what story we want to tell about Hanukkah, I imagine for many of us, the most important thing we need to tell someone, if someone stops us on the street and says, what is this holiday about Hanukkah all about? We're going to tell them that there was a battle, there were Maccabees, and then at the end of the day, they found a small cruse of oil that lasted, instead of just 1 day, for 8 days. And we light our menorah for 8 days in commemoration of that miracle, right? That's what I would say, right? If I had to boil down Hanukkah to one sentence, that's what it would be about. So the Talmud actually has no tractate dedicated to Hanukkah. Hidden in the tractate of Shabbat on a sort of technicality discussing the differences between Shabbat and Hanukkah based on what type of candles you have to light, we begin to learn about what Hanukkah is all about. If you're with me in the handout, source number 5. The Gemara starts, my Hanukkah. What's Hanukkah all about? And so the Gemara tells us, our sages taught, on the 25th day of Kislev, there were 8 days of Hanukkah where we're not allowed to eulogize or fast. For when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they contaminated all the oil in the sanctuary, and then the monarch of the house of Chashmonaim mustered strength and defeated them. They searched and they could only find one jug marked with the seal of the Kohen Gadol, and there's only enough to light for 1 day. The miracle occurred, and they kindled it for 8 nights. And the next year, what they do, they establish a day of Yom Tov, of Hallel, of thanks. Right? There's no mention here of the mitzvah of the command of lighting Hanukkah candles every year. Right? It's totally absent from the story. But what is important in our conversation, in our observance of Chanukah, that's a day of Yom Tov, of jubilation, of Hallel, of singing and giving thanks. Knowing our time's a little short, we'll jump the next source, skipping to the next strata of Jewish thought, Maimonides, in codifying the laws of Hallel, of the special prayer that we say on every holiday in celebration of the wonderful miracles that we have, actually deposits all the laws of singing Hallel in the section dedicated to Chanukah, right? That of all the different places where you could put the laws of Hallel, he deposits them in the tractate, in the area section based on Chanukah. And I think, again, part of the question we're asking ourselves, or part of what Maimonides is highlighting to us, that Chanukah is the exemplar for all the different Hallels that we say. That Chanukah, of all the different ones, he doesn't put it for Rosh Chodesh, doesn't put it on the festivals, or his laws about Passover, all the different other times that we say Hallel. Chanukah is the place where he decides to elaborate and elucidate all different laws when it comes to what we say for Hallel. And I think this ties in to a much broader concept on why we say Hallel. So we'll take a step back for a second. When do we say Hallel? When do we say this praise of thanksgiving to God during our year? When do we say it?
Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot.
Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. Modern day, we say that on Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim. We'll leave that out for a second. Rosh Chodesh, thank you. Right? So we say on all these different days. And the reason why we say it, why do we say on those days? This is where the questions get a little bit harder. What are we commemorating on Passover? Rabbi Kurtz, I'm surprised.
Oh, I don't get involved in these matters. No.
No, I didn't mean you. I meant well, I'm waiting for the renowned Stanford crowd to. Someone's got to represent. What are we celebrating on Passover?
Leaving Egypt.
Leaving Egypt, right? We're celebrating the miracle of Egypt, of the miraculous Exodus. We're also celebrating the special sacrifices that we bring on Passover. And in some ways, even more, our Hallel, this praise that we're giving to God, is much more connected to the sacrifices than they are actually to the miracles. And I'll give you an example, right? On Rosh Chodesh, on the festival of the new month, what are we celebrating? That we're all werewolves, so now we can rest assured for a couple weeks. We're celebrating the special sacrifice that we bring, the Musaf. These are all days where we say Musaf, the special Musaf service. And part of bringing that sacrifice is sharing the Hallel, which accompanies the Korban. Right? That's true at every time that we say Hallel on during the year, except for one. Except for Chanukah. The Gemara already in Erechim, source number 6, points out that this is a very strange thing, that we say Chanukah, we say Hallel on Chanukah, but there's no prohibition of doing work, and there's no special Korban. And answers the Talmud that it's all because of the miracle. And as Rabbi Cutler describes this in the contemporary time, that the role of Hallel on Chanukah is different than we say any other year, any other time during the year. That any other time during the year, our Hallel is ritualistically connected to the sacrifice. But when it comes to Chanukah, our Hallel is actually part of the institution of how the rabbis imagined us celebrating and commemorating the miracle. That it's a way for us, that each person, he or she, needs to interpret for him or herself what he sees, and therefore to establish it in his or her mind. That through Hallel, there's a way for us to process the miracle of Chanukah beyond anything. And we actually see this codified in Halakha today. In the Code of Jewish Law, in the Shulchan Aruch, Rav Moshe, the Ramah, notes that the custom on Chanukah is to sing songs and praises at the meals that we add for these days, converting them into mitzvah meals. That there's a special thing on Chanukah to sing songs about the miracle of Hanukkah that's part as how we interpret the holiday. So we get to Maoz Tzur, and we recognize that this isn't just some song that helps us feel good about ourselves this time of year, but is actually a precursor in one of the integral ways that we commemorate the holiday, that we process the miracle. The question then we have to ask ourselves is, what is Maoz Tzur telling us about the miracle? And for that, of course, we have to look at Maoz Tzur. So you can either look at the beginning of your handout where I have it in English, or you can look at the end of your, in the middle of your handout on pages 4 and 5, where I actually have it in Hebrew in great detail. This is a wonderful work that was put together by Rabbi Dr. Michael Orlean, who is a teacher and scholar at Keren B'Yavne in Israel. And he put together an annotated Maoz Tzur, which is beautiful. And one of the things, even if you don't read any Hebrew or don't understand any of the notations, if you look with me on page number 3 and 4, you'll see how every line of Maoz Tzur is carefully sculpted, carefully crafted, and molded based on a large draw of all different rabbinic sources and biblical sources, whether it's from Psalms, whether it's from the Torah, from the prophets, from the Talmud, from the Midrash. All of these, every word is intentionally positioned to convey a message, a theme, an idea. It's unbelievable. And so we have this, we're going to look through that a little bit now. But the themes that we want to think about are, what exactly does Maoz Tzur want to tell us about processing the miracle now that we've established that Hanukkah is all about song? That one of the key ways that we remember the miracle of Hanukkah is not by lighting the candles, is not by eating latkes, is not by eating sufganiyot, although they are all delicious. It is by singing. And by the way, just if you need further proof of this, on Hanukkah we'll start adding into our davening the Ala Nisim Prayer. If you think about what it says, what do? They tell the whole story. And then what happens? What happens in the end of Ala Nisim? What do we say? How do we commemorate the day? Right? V'kavu shmonat yemei Chanukah elu. And they established these 8 days, not for eating latkes, not even for lighting candles. Lahodo ulahalel l'shimcha hagadol. To give praise and to sing thanks to God and gratitude for this wonderful miracle. So song and music is so much essential to what it is to celebrate Hanukkah, and Maoz Tzur is our ticket to that. So let's look at what Maoz Tzur means. Anyone's ever heard of Rock of Ages?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about the Christian hymn, right? Rock of Ages is actually really a Christian hymn that was written, the name was borrowed in the 19th century by 2 Reform rabbis who wrote an English version take on Maoz Tzur. And it's very different than our Maoz Tzur. If we had more time, I would compare and contrast it with you. But suffice it to say, Rock of Ages really speaks to where the Reform movement was in the 1900s. And, it removes some of the Jewish history component, makes it much more universal, is much less intense. There's no gore. There's no slaughter our enemies, bring revenge on those who have hurt us, which we'll talk about soon. And the desire, the hope one day to rebuild the temple, as we see in the first stanza of Maoz Tzur, is totally removed. But that tells us much more about Reform Judaism in the 1900s, which is not our topic tonight. It's a nice song. But what I want to focus on as a foil, obviously, is the actual Maoz Tzur. So let's look at the first paragraph. Maoz Tzur is divided into 6 paragraphs. They follow a scheme where the first and last paragraph bookend the entire passage and are similar in that they make pleas for the future. Verses or stanzas 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all reflections on historical events, which are pretty famous in Jewish history, as we will see. We'll talk a little bit more about their pattern. Maoz Tzur is written by who? Anyone know? I'll give you a hint. It's spelled out in the first letters of every paragraph, right? It's written by someone by the name of Mordechai. We assume it might be in the 13th century, not exactly sure. And maybe the grandson of the Radak, or David Kimchi, or others claim that it is someone who is quoted by the Tosafis, or the grandchildren of Rashi in the Gemara and Nida. Either way, we're not exactly sure who wrote it. The first 5 paragraphs are original, actually, and the 6th paragraph is actually a later addition. We only start seeing it in the 1700s and maybe a little bit early. So what's Maoz Tzur all about? So if you look with me, you can have it in your handout or in a siddur. O mighty rock of my salvation, to praise you is a delight. Right? In English, it's hard to translate from English to Hebrew, so it's not as lyrical as one might hope. Restore my house of prayer, and there we will bring a thanksgiving offering, a korban todah, which is the chief sacrifice in Messianic times. We are told that the chief sacrifice in those times will be a korban todah, a sacrifice of gratitude. When you will have prepared the slaughter in the art scroll, it's actually the blaspheming, but the actual word means the barking foe, right? We're comparing them to dogs. And then I shall complete with a song of hymn, the dedication of the altar. Right? What are we praying? What are we talking about here? This is the first paragraph. It's aspirational. And we are aspiring that in the future, we should be able to rebuild the temple. We should be able to bring sacrifices. We should be saved from our foes. Many or some will critique this as being a little bit tough. Prepare for the slaughter, not exactly the way we want to talk about people in this day and age. I'm not here to judge. I will just give context, right? If Maoz Tzur is written in the 1300s, so we're talking about a group of Jews in Germany that are right after the Crusades and watch the destruction of their major cities of Ashkenaz, and are now living not just during the Black Plague, which unfortunately this year we can appreciate what it's like to live during a pandemic, but also are living in a time where they're being blamed for spreading the Black Plague, and therefore they're facing pogroms and prosecution. And so it's a very dark and difficult time for the Jewish people. And we hear that at the very beginning. Hanukkah is supposed to be about celebration, about salvation, about joy, right? And we're right out of the gate. What are we talking about? God protect us and save us. We're looking to the future. We're not going to look at it tonight, but in your handout, there's a quote from Rabbi Yehuda, a little bit of an article from Rabbi Yehuda Amital, Zichrono Livracha, who was the Rosh Yeshiva, the head and founder of the Gush yeshiva called Yeshivat Har Zion, where he talks a little about the role of the first paragraph here, where we recognize that Chanukah was never a full redemption, but there's a sliver of a renewal of a Jewish sovereignty for 200 years, and that is enough to celebrate. That I'll let you look at that. The next paragraph number 2, excuse me. My soul has been sated with troubles. My strength has been consumed with grief. They embittered my life with hardship. What does it sound like? Chaya meru bikoshi, right? Vayimaru et chayehem. Sounds like the verses from Exodus, where we are referring to the bondage of Egypt, and this whole paragraph is all about the Egyptian bondage, with the calf-like kingdom's bondage, right? The Egyptians are referred to like a calf based on the verses in the prophet. And also just their general demeanor. They're described as lazy because they live and they are fed by the substance of the Nile. Ubiyado Agdola, with God's great hand stretched hand. Hotziata Segula, God redeemed God's chosen nation. Chel Paro v'Chozaro, all of Pharaoh's armies went down like a stone in the deep, right? We were redeemed from Egypt, right? I just want to point out the model here, which we will see now repeated 4 different times, excuse me, that we start with a crisis. There's this crisis. There's this moment where we're embittered, we're in trouble, and we are redeemed by God. Who's missing from this paragraph? Who helps God redeem us? Moses. Where's Moshe? Where's Aaron? And one of the things that we'll see over and over again is that Maoz makes a conscious effort to take the human middleman out of the equation. That we focus, part of what Maoz is telling us is that we are trying to recognize that these events come from God, that God is the source of our salvation, and that we should recognize that. That's part of how we process the miracle. The next paragraph, to the holy abode of his world, he brought me. But there too, right, we got to the land of Israel, we established monarchy, we established a kingdom, we have a temple, but there too, I had no rest, and an oppressor came and exiled me, for I served aliens, I served idols, I was disloyal to God, we were exiled, and we drank poison wine, and we left our land. But Kate's Bavel, Zerubbabel, Kate Shivim Hoshavti, that after 70 years, we were finally redeemed. Jeremiah's 70 years. It's a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Cohen, and I want to thank him for his hospitality. After 70 years, we were redeemed and we were saved. Again, this pattern of we were in crisis, we were in trouble. We even see here why we served idols, but we are ultimately redeemed by God. We built the temple, we were saved. The next one will sound very familiar to you. Sorry. Karos Komat Birosh, right? Again, this is the cleverness of these paragraphs of the language here is so powerful. To sever the towering cypress sought the Agagi, right, who we're referring to as Haman HaAgagi, right? We know that Haman is this is the enemy, and as the Midrash refers to Mordechai as the Rosh, this towering anchor for the people, Haman ben Hamdasa Hagagi, we're told. So we see the inversion here in this reference to Haman, and again. His arrogance ultimately leads him to be captured. Rosh Yemini Sesa, God raised up and saved Yemini, right? Just as we refer to Mordechai in the Megillah as Ish Yemini, and then we the enemy's name, invoking the notion of wiping out Amalek, that we were able to wipe out Amalek and destroy and defeat Haman. God hung Haman on a tree. Did God hang Haman? Who persevered in the story of the Megillah, right? Whose name is not listed anywhere in the Megillah. God is totally absent from the Megillah. And we read about the role that Achashverosh plays and Esther and Mordechai, but they were absent. Again, highlighting this theme that we want to highlight, that God is our source of salvation. And then we'll see this repeated one last time. And this one is finally, we get to Chanukah. And one of the questions, if you look at this, as we sing every year, we should be asking ourselves is, we're at 5 out of 6 paragraphs of a song that's supposed to be about Chanukah. Have we mentioned Chanukah once yet? We mentioned the first paragraph. We said Chanukah HaMizbeach. We said we want to reinaugurate the altar. So it might have been a reference, a sly reference to Chanukah, but not really. Finally, we talk about the Chanukah story. Yevanim nikvesu alai. The Greeks came and attacked me. Azai bimei chashmanim. In the times of the Chashmanim. You ever wonder why we say Chashmanim instead of Chashmonayim? Well, over here we have source, and if you look at the footnotes, source 41, it's actually a quote, a reference to a verse in Tehillim, and it fits the rhyme scheme of the book of the song. Hence we have it. Upartzu chomo migdalai, and they made holes. They breached the walls of my towers, and they contaminated all the cruises of oil. umina otsar kankanim, but one remnant remained. Nasa nes shoshanim. A miracle was created for the shoshanim, the roses or the lilies. These are described of the Jewish people based on a metaphor in Shir Hashirim. B'nei vina yemei shmona kavu shirananim. The children of wisdom established 8 days of song and praise, of song and jubilation. Right? Again, we're highlighting this theme that Hanukkah is celebrated through song. I want to make a couple points just on this stanza before we move on to the last part of this song. Really, the fifth stanza we finally get to talk about Hanukkah. And already we begin to see a theme here. Why do you think it takes us 5 stanzas to get to Hanukkah? There are no wrong answers. Any thoughts? Why if Hanukkah, just to review, right, we established that Hanukkah is one of the primary fundamental ways that we celebrate Hanukkah is through song, it's through Hallel, it's through giving thanks to God. And Maoz is a very old version of that, where we're able to tap in and help process the miracle, right? That's part of why we do it through song. So why do we wait till the 5th stanza to talk about Hanukkah?
Something to do with Hallel?
Something to do with Hallel, perhaps. Do you want to expand on that, Phyllis?
I was thinking because we say Hallel on Hanukkah, we don't on Purim, do we?
We don't say on Purim, you're right.
Okay.
So perhaps, yeah.
I was going to say perhaps because maybe it's the 5th holiday in line that we say Hallel.
So perhaps I'm going to build on that. Perhaps this is what we're referring to, but I think both those points really tied together.
We already mentioned we mentioned the 3 festivals and Rosh Chodesh. So then this would maybe be the next.
So perhaps tying your 2 ideas together, perhaps what we're suggesting here is that really Hanukkah is a celebration of an ongoing theme, right? The theme we've seen over and over again is that we're in crisis and then we were redeemed by God. And perhaps the message of how we process that miracle on Hanukkah is to recognize that there's this ongoing motif that when we're challenged, that there's a greater pattern that happens here in history, and not just in history, but looking forward to the future, which is the next stanza, which brings us to the next stanza of recognizing God's role in the unfolding of history and unfolding of the Jewish destiny that we are encountering, that we're in crisis. There are other people that are playing roles where we leave them totally nameless, because we want to be able to highlight here this notion that Hanukkah is a recognition that we can step back and see God's role in as Hanukkah is just one waypoint on the different train of Jewish future as it unfolds, of the Jewish destiny as it unfolds. It starts all the way in Egypt, and then it continues through the Babylonian exile, and then continues through the Purim saga. And last, it continues during the Greek saga, as we'll see in a second, we refer to as the Edom exile, which we'll get to in a moment. But before that, and I want to just highlight part of that theme, B'nei Vinah, right? Children of wisdom should recognize this. Why are we pointing that out? Rabbi Norman Lamb, has a beautiful piece in one of the last published letters that he wrote in his lifetime about the role of Havdalah, which I have over here in source number 11, where he talks about, we say Havdalah in the bracha of Shmona Esrei of giving wisdom, that God should give us wisdom. So he asks a very obvious question. What type of wisdom do you need to be able to distinguish between light and dark, between Kodesh and Chol, between holy and profane? Why do I need wisdom to be able to see that? Any child, my 8-month-old daughter can tell me when it's night and when it's day, right? Why do I need wisdom for that? Why is that something I'm praying to God for wisdom? And one of the points he makes is that when you live in a realm where both there's a value to, and he's talking about in the context of Torah U'Mada, but for those who opt to live both for light and for darkness, for Israel and the nations, for Shabbat and the weekdays, for the holy and the profane, you need wisdom to be able to calibrate and see God's hand through all of that. And that's part of what we're highlighting here and part of this message. It's part of, every morning when I say and every afternoon, I think about the vaccine, right? I think about the wisdom and the incredible miracle that God has imparted to a group of dedicated, hardworking medical professionals to be able to find a cure to what's going on right now. Being able to recognize that and not just say, oh, it's accidents of science. We have some smart people who had the right technology at that moment. You could look at the Hanukkah story and say, well, it was guerrilla warfare. They knew their terrain and they knew what was going on, and they were able to beat back the Greeks. But you could see the broader narrative and see God's hand throughout. It's very similar to what we hear about 1948, 1967, right? We could talk about the strategic decisions made by the Israeli generals and perhaps some of the mistakes made by some of the enemies. But at the same time, in order to see God's hand, part of what Maoz is processing is pointing us to recognize about the miracle is to see God's hand through that process. There's a beautiful piece by Rav Hirsch in source number 12 about the notion about just one cruse of oil, that a single pure spark, laurely treasured in but one single Jewish home, in Jewish heart, is sufficient for God to set aflame once more the whole spirit of Judaism. It's a beautiful translation of Rav Hirsch's German. I'm sure in the original German that consisted of about one word, the size of the entire page. And it's in source number 12 if you want to reflect on it. It's one of my favorite comments on this section of Maoz. I just want to point out two historical notes about Maoz as we end this section. So if you look with me on page number, the page with the pictures of the temple on it, page number 7. If you look, you'll see a Sidur from 1845 where the stanza doesn't start Yevanim nikvesu alai, but underlined there Yehirim nikvesu alai. Yuhara, the arrogant ones. And one of the fascinating things is that Maoz actually gets censored over time of Jewish history because in Russia, Greater Russia, Ukraine, Yevanim was referred to as the general non-Jew. And there was this concern or this attempt that the Ukrainians were angry that they were referred to as Yevanim, so it got censored. Some of it by non-Jewish officials, some of it by Jewish officials worried. If you look in the same siddur, right next to it, we have in the Ala Nisim Prayer, where it says, instead of Malchut Yavan, it says Malchut Antiochus, right? We swap out the words Greek to refer to other people. By the way, where does Greek come from? Just a random tidbit. Where does the word Yevanim come from? Right? In Hebrew, all of these words, they stem from something. Where does it come from? Where is Greece located? The Ionian Islands, Ionia, the Hebraization of that term, and that's how it came about. We talk about breaking through, that they broke down Chomot Migdalai, they break through the walls of our Migdal, and I'll leave you just with a question to ponder. What it seems to be referring to, as the Mishnah in Midot talks about, is that there is a small fence that surrounds the temple. You could kind of see it in the pictures I've shared over here. And it's about 40 inches high, not very high at all. And in it, they had a warning. It was called the Soreg. And you weren't allowed to pass it if you weren't a Jew. No strangers is to enter beyond this point into the temple or its enclosure. Anyone who is caught will be himself responsible for his ensuing death, right? The temple was a beit tefillah for everyone, was a house of prayer for everyone. And so all people from all walks of life were welcome in the temple plaza to pray and worship God. But there are certain areas that were reserved for Jews, and the Greeks came and they actually made 13 breaks in that wall to symbol that there was no difference, that if you're a Greek, you could go anywhere. There's no difference between Jews or Greeks. We're all people, and to remove all of that. And then when it was reinstituted, the rabbis made a decree that there should be 13 spots at each of those places that we bow down to God, recognizing opportunity to serve God and to recognize a certain role and responsibility that Jewish people have in the world. I'll just throw this out. We don't have time to talk about tonight. Of all the things the Greeks did, why does Maoz Tzur memorialize them breaking a 40-inch barrier? Of all the terrible things that they did, why is that what we're so worried about and that we recall? You're welcome to think about that. If you have any suggestions or answers for that, please feel free to email me. My email's on the source sheet, but it's something to think about. We were running a little bit out of time, so I'm just gonna, the last paragraph is, again, focuses, we've gone through now 4 different models of where we were crisis followed by redemption by God. The last paragraph goes back to the theme of requesting for God to redeem us, and in particular focuses on the current reality, or the reality when this was written. Bear your holy arm and hasten the ends for salvation. Avenge the vengeance of your servant's blood from the wicked nation. It's been too far delayed, and let us repent the red one in the nethermost shadow and establish for us the 7 shepherds. Right? Anyone have any idea what that last line means? So one of the interesting things the Jews of the 13th century are contending with is that their primary challenge is the church, is Christianity, is pogroms, and the Crusades. And if you read this from that perspective, we actually have an interesting veiled anti-Christian polemic in this. Techei admon, push away admon. Admon comes from the word adom. Adom means what in Hebrew?
Red.
Red, the red one. Push away the red one. B'tzel tzamon, in the nethermost portion. What exactly does that mean? Someone would like to explain this as b'tzel. What does tzel mean in Hebrew?
Shadow.
Shadow. What does a tselem mean in Ashkenazic Hebrew?
Image.
It means an idol, but in Ashkenazic terms, it referred to the cross.
Oh.
In the shadow of the cross, meaning,
No.
and the religious prosecutions of the Pope against the people. Hakim lanu re'eh shiva, or ro'im shiva, return to us the 7 shepherds. Either that is a reference to Micha, to the prophecy that we should have redemption with 7 shepherds, or ro'eh shiva, the shepherd of 7. If you look in source number 17, the famous prophecy of Isaiah, that a wolf shall dwell with the lamb, that the leopard should lie down with the kid, that the calf and the lion cub and the fatling together with a little boy to herd them. There are 7 animals there. So this might be a reference to that vision of Messiah, of redemption, of the final peace, the final time when everyone will be the world will be at peace, that there are 7, Ro'eh Shiva, the shepherd of 7 animals, meaning we're praying for that last moment. So what is this all about? And let's tie this together. In your handout on page number 9, you'll actually see a 7th section that was added in recent years to celebrate the Holocaust and the reestablishment of Israel, which again builds on this theme of this continuing unplugging and unfolding of the Jewish narrative. So what are we trying to understand? So let's just recap, and we'll move forward, and we'll end, and I'll take any questions. So we started off by talking about music. The Hanukkah is all about music. That one of the key institutions early on for understanding and internalizing and celebrating the miracle and the holiday of Hanukkah is music. Hallel is different on Hanukkah. Hallel enables us to process and understand and reflect on what the miracle is all about And the music, the songs we sing, help us process and enunciate and publicize those miracles. And so the question we ask ourselves are, what is Maoz Tzur telling us about processing those miracles? So number one, Maoz Tzur is telling us that all the salvations come from God. We take all the humans out. We recognize that even though there are agents of God throughout our lives, that everyone can be an Elijah one day, Rabbi Cohen, right? Everyone can be Elijah, but they're all messengers of God, and ultimately God pulls the string, and if it's not you, it's someone else, and therefore really salvation comes from God. Number one. Number two, there's a sense of Hanukkah in the broader scope, the broader process of Jewish history, of the unfolding of the Jewish destiny. And that's why we only mentioned Hanukkah in verse number 5. That's why we talk about all the other different iterations of redemption. And that's why Maoz Tzur doesn't end in verse number 5, but it goes on and on and on. And number 3, there's a recognition that we're not there yet. And that there's a challenge where we pray for that final redemption, but we're not there yet. And we have faith and understanding for the long haul. Rabbi Targin, I'll end with this. One of my teachers at Yeshivat Har Tzion talks about in an essay about how Hanukkah is really a holiday at the last moment of the Jewish redemptive cycle and the first moment of the Jewish exile. And that Hanukkah, as exile, he notes, as exile begins to loom, a final miracle to occur to energize the nation and lend it confidence to survive the harsh road ahead. One might claim that the miracle of Hanukkah was the last step on the road to exile, the final moment in which God performed a national miracle reminiscent of its days of glory. Kislev is eminently suited for this dedication of Galut and its unique history. A moment located at the commencement of winter, it launches the winter of Jewish history and the desperate commitment that demanded. The moment that we have to recognize that each stage of Jewish history is unveiled by dedication of the Mishkan, and the redemptive period commences during Nisan, and while the diaspora era begins in Kislev. That part of Hanukkah is this recognition, not just that moment, but to carry us through these challenging times. As the great comic on your source sheet, the great Israeli comic Dry Bones notes, the real miracle of Hanukkah is not that the light lasted for 8 nights. The real miracle is that the light has lasted for more than 2,000 years. That's what we are celebrating on Hanukkah. That's what Maoz Tzur is focusing us on the notion of our relationship with God and God's role in the unfolding of Jewish history, the recognition that Hanukkah is just one stop on the waypoint of Jewish history, and the recognition that we're getting closer, but we're not there yet, but we're still on the right way. So I want to end where I began, thanking our virtual hosts and Rabbi Cohen and Rabbi Kurtz for putting this together and including us. It's so nice to be able to spend some time learning with you before Hanukkah. When it's safe, I invite you all to West Hartford. I think we'll take some questions if anyone has.
Rabbi Lloyd from Congregation of Good Shalom. I noticed on page 5, you have I'd like to revisit the Rambam comment, and he talks about the Jewish kings subsequent to defeating of the Greeks. Isn't that the Hasmonean dynasties were developed at that time, as opposed to the Davidic that was supposed to be according to the Torah?
Lloyd, you bring up an excellent point, and perhaps this is why there's no tractate dedicated to Hanukkah, because the rabbis were not happy with the Hashmonaim because they were Kohanim and they usurped the throne and they became kings. But what Maimonides is highlighting, which is so powerful, it makes Maimonides' statement all the more powerful, is that even in that situation, even when it was not ideal, even when the people who restored Jewish sovereignty were doing it in violation of Torah law, we still celebrate a holiday for the restoration of 200 years of Jewish sovereignty, even when they are not the most committed to the values and the strictures of Torah and Halakha. And this is a section from a passage by Rav Amital, Rav Yehuda Amital, and you can imagine that he goes on to this to compare it to the modern state of Israel and the incredible religious significance that it has, as he writes in the last part of the excerpt. And this, despite the fact that the Jewish state was established, was extremely limited in its independence, and its leaders were very far removed from the Torah, right? The later kings of the Hasmonite dynasty became Hellenized themselves. They were more Hellenized than the Hellenized Jews that they defeated during Hanukkah. So your point is totally correct. They are in violation of Torah law, but even so, we celebrate the glimmer of Jewish sovereignty that exists for 200 years before being reestablished in a different way in the democracy in 1948.
Oh, any other questions? Any other answers? Rabbi Brander, thank you so much. Sorry it's a little bit late, but really appreciate your Torah, especially coming out of such a holy city as West Hartford, Connecticut. Where's your house, by the way? I mean, nobody really would know, but I'd appreciate it. Where do you live?
I live on Seneca Road. Where do you live?
I lived on Sequin. I guess they put the rabbis on the S streets, but I know what you're talking about. Everything there is Mohawk, Sequin, Mohegan.
When I first came, they said that, you want to look at all the streets on the reservation. I thought they were making a joke about ghettos and Jews.
No, yeah.
I realized that they actually meant a reservation.
Well,
as a native Floridian, seeing streets like Seminole and things like that bring joy, although the 21-degree weather does not.
I hear really wonderful things about, your leadership in West Hartford. You have a great community there, and Hashem should bless you to continue to be a wonderful rabbi, pastor. And Rabbi Brander also is well known for really coming up with a lot of creative programs. People should know. We've actually shared some of them, and he's a real creative. And we have a WhatsApp group, and he's one of the few people that actually posts really wonderful ideas. Most people don't post, but he's got a lot of great ideas. So keep up the holy work. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I think my best claim to fame is our wonderful Door Lador author. We run a family learning program, which used to be in person, and now we do it virtually. And every week we have a incredibly complex, sophisticated learning packet for all different ages on the same theme, on the same page, from preschoolers all the way to sixth graders. And multi-pages. This last one was 10 pages long on the meaning and the measures of the menorah. Of course, I take no credit for writing them. We have a far better author and writer, Elisheva Cohen.
Yes, well, we're going to share some of her wonderful work. She does great work. Thank you. Thanks for being the catalyst.
My pleasure.
Thank
All right.
you. Rabbi Kurtz, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yasher Kolach, Rabbi Brander, and thank you for coming on, Rabbi Cohen, and our president, Toby Schaefer. Tune in next week for our culmination of this 5-part pre-Hanukkah series, because next week it won't be pre-Hanukkah, it'll actually be on Hanukkah, and we are privileged, we'll have home court advantage with Rabbi Cohen. We'll be finishing off the program with a class entitled, We Are All Kohanim, the mystery and message of lights in the temple and on Hanukkah. So tune in at 8 o'clock, same time next week, same link. Welcome all the communities to join us, and looking forward, everyone should have a Freilich in Hanukkah. Thank you, Rabbi Brander.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Everybody.